Imagine you open, like a really dense, highly technical textbook, something on structural engineering or maybe quantum mechanics.
Right, something heavy.
Yeah, exactly. And you expect, clear premises, logical deductions, mathematical proofs. You expect the author to be some person who sat in a room, crunched the numbers, and published their findings.
Naturally. That's how science works.
But what if you open that exact same textbook, you flip to the introduction, and the very first line stated that the mathematical formulas within were, well, handed down directly from the architect of the cosmos?
I mean, it would completely upend your understanding of what a rational system is supposed to be.
It really would.
Because in the modern world, we demand this strict firewall between the secular logic of a textbook and the mythic narratives of religion.
Right. But when you step into the world of ancient Indian philosophy, specifically the Sāṃkhya tradition, that firewall, it just doesn't exist.
It's completely absent.
Yeah. We are looking at the origins of what many consider to be the world's very first rational, analytical system of thought. And yet, its historical origin story reads like a sprawling, epic, divine mythology.
Which is fascinating.
It is. So, welcome to today's deep dive. You and I are going to explore the origins, the traditional guru lineage, and the staggering evolution of the Sāṃkhya darśana, or Sāṃkhya philosophy.
And we have an incredibly rich stack of sources to work through with you today.
I really do.
We are drawing from a comprehensive lecture transcript on the IKS PP-3.1-3 curriculum that was delivered by Shankar Santhamurthy,
Right.
alongside detailed philosophical inquiry texts and these really intricate historical diagrams that map out Sāṃkhya's footprint over the centuries.
It is a massive journey. We are going to trace this lineage from its supposedly divine inception down to human sages, and then map out the four major historiographical phases of its development over roughly 3,000 years.
3 millennia. It's huge.
But before we unpack how a rational system is born from divine myth, we need to establish a really clear ground rule for you as we navigate this material.
Yeah, that is a crucial point to make up front.
Go ahead.
The source texts we are analyzing today are overflowing with rich theological narratives, ancient scriptural claims, and very specific religious viewpoints.
Incorporating both theistic and agnostic elements, right?
Exactly. But our mission here is strictly analytical. We are impartially reporting on these texts as historical and philosophical frameworks.
Right. We're not preachers here.
No, not at all. We are not endorsing any of these ancient scriptures as literal, objective, historical events. Nor are we taking any theological sides. We're just looking at what the texts say.
We're essentially acting as philosophical detectives. We want to understand how this profoundly ancient tradition understood its own origins.
And how it went about structuring reality.
Right. And the central mystery we are trying to solve is that initial paradox. How did a system rooted in divine cosmic mythology eventually become recognized by modern thinkers as the foundational, rational grammar of an entire civilization?
To understand that transformation, we really have to examine the concept of authority in the ancient world.
Authority.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Think about it. If a philosophy is going to categorize the entirety of the phenomenal world, it requires a foundation that is entirely unassailable.
I see.
According to orthodox Indian philosophy and the provided shastras, the scriptures, the lineage of Sāṃkhya does not begin with a mortal human being.
Which is the crazy part.
Right. It originates with Lord Mahavishnu.
Which is just such a wild concept to me. I mean, Sāṃkhya is famous for being this enumerative, highly logical philosophy.
Very mathematical.
Exactly. The sources note that it meticulously categorizes reality into 24, 25, or 26 specific principles, detailing exactly how the universe operates.
Down to the smallest detail.
Right. So why anchor something so mathematical, so grounded in logic, to a divine figure? Why not just credit a brilliant ancient logician?
Because, well, if a human logician invents the system, another human logician can come along and just dismantle it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
By anchoring this incredibly rigorous framework to Mahavishnu, the tradition elevates the logic from a mere human invention to a cosmic truth.
Unassailable, like you said.
Exactly. The sources describe a process called the avatarana of jñāna.
The descent of knowledge.
Precisely. It is the transition of ultimate wisdom from the divine realm to the mortal realm.
Okay.
The implication here is profound, right?
Yeah.
The structure of the universe, these 24 or 25 principles, they aren't just clever ways to organize human thought.
They are the actual reality.
They are the blueprints. Mahavishnu isn't just giving humanity a philosophy. He is essentially downloading the source code of the cosmos.
Okay, let's play with that download analogy for a moment. Because when I was reading through the concept of the guruparaṃparā, the traditional preceptor lineage through which this knowledge is passed, I kept thinking about a blockchain.
A blockchain.
Yeah.
Walk me through how you see that connecting to an ancient spiritual lineage.
Okay, so think about the mechanics of an open source code passed securely from node to node.
Okay, I'm following.
In a blockchain, every new participant, or block, has a cryptographic hash that permanently links them back to the previous block.
Great, ensuring the data isn't tampered with.
Exactly. All the way back to the Genesis block. In Sāṃkhya, Mahavishnu is that Genesis block. The guruparaṃparā is the decentralized ledger.
Wow, that is a surprisingly fitting parallel.
Right.
And in this ancient ledger, that Genesis block of knowledge has to be transmitted to a first human node.
Right. It has to enter the physical world somehow.
Exactly. The avatarana of jñāna has to actually land somewhere. This brings us to the most vital figure in the early Sāṃkhya tradition.
Kapila Maharishi.
Sage Kapila.
Yeah.
Yes.
The sources spend an enormous amount of time detailing exactly who this figure is. And, he is definitely not portrayed as a regular human being who just happened to be incredibly smart.
Not at all. Kapila is recognized as the founding Maharishi, the great seer of the Sāṃkhya darśana.
He's the guy.
He's the guy. The texts provide a highly specific, miraculous genealogy for him. He is stated to be born to Devahuti.
Who is the daughter of Svayambhuva Manu, right?
Yes, an incredibly important figure in Hindu cosmology. And his father was the sage Prajapati Kardama.
Quite the pedigree.
Very much so. But his parentage is almost secondary to his ontological status.
What do you mean?
He is explicitly described as an avatara, an incarnation of Mahavishnu himself.
Okay, so the knowledge doesn't just pass from God to man. God becomes the man to deliver the knowledge.
Precisely.
And what strikes me is the emphasis on his pre-installed wisdom. He didn't have to study for decades.
No, not at all.
The texts say he was born with innate merit, with dharma, with jñāna, which is knowledge, and vairagya, which is dispassion.
Consider the philosophical necessity of that. If the system is perfect, the vessel delivering it must be completely untainted by human ignorance.
So no trial and error.
None. He arrives with a specific cosmological mission, the welfare of the universe. He is the seer who dons the semblance of a sage to physically prop up the earth with knowledge.
I am just amazed by the historical PR campaigns surrounding Kapila.
PR campaign?
Yeah. When you look at the source material, it is staggering how many different traditions and texts go out of their way to validate him.
Oh, absolutely.
It is as if every major thinker in ancient India had to give him a blue check verification, to legitimize their own work.
That's a great way to put it. Let's walk through the scriptural evidence the sources provide, because the breadth of it is wild.
Let's do it.
We can start with the absolute oldest layer of Indian scripture, the Rig Veda.
The Rig Veda itself.
Yes. In the 10th mandala of the Rig Veda, there is a reference to a cosmological process where 10 heroes or seers are generated in the front of creation. Kapila is explicitly placed among them, and the text glorifies him as being equal to Prajapati, or Brahman itself.
So literally, the oldest text we have is saying this entity is on the same level as the ultimate reality.
Yes. And as the centuries progress and the literature evolves, that reverence only deepens.
Right, it doesn't fade.
No. When we look at the Upanishads, specifically the Shvatashvatara Upanishad, the text refers to him as a rishi, a seer.
And it says he was filled with knowledge from birth, right?
Exactly. A seer who was entirely filled with multifarious knowledge from the exact moment he was born.
Validating that pre-installed wisdom again.
Yes.
And it doesn't stop with the dense philosophical texts. The great epics and narrative histories, the Puranas, do the exact same thing.
They absolutely do. The Valmiki Ramayana explicitly names him as an incarnation of Vishnu.
Wow.
The Puranic literature is completely saturated with him. The Brahman Purana, the Bhagavad Purana, the Vishnu Purana, they all point to him as the divine force that sustains the world.
And the Mahabharata too, right?
Yeah. Yes. The massive epic, the Mahabharata, cites him as the promulgator of the Sāṃkhya framework.
But the ultimate endorsement, the one that really, to me, cements his status, has to be the Bhagavad Gita.
Without a doubt. The Bhagavad Gita is a core philosophical text embedded within the Mahabharata.
Right.
In a crucial chapter, Lord Krishna is revealing his supreme cosmic form. And to explain his absolute nature, he identifies himself with the pinnacle of every single category in existence.
Like he's the best of everything.
Right. Among mountains, he is the Himalayas.
Yeah.
Among bodies of water, he is the ocean. And when he speaks of the great contemplatives, he declares, among the munis, I am Kapila.
Think about the weight of that statement for a listener trying to grasp the authority of this philosophy.
It's massive.
The supreme deity of the text is saying, if you want to understand the highest form of human sage, look at Kapila.
And that endorsement echoes through the subsequent millennia. Centuries later, you have figures like Adi Shankaracharya.
The Advaita Vedanta philosophy.
Exactly. The paramount philosopher of the Advaita school. He validates Kapila's authority in his commentaries. And then you have Madhvacharya, the founder of the Dvaita or dualistic school, doing the exact same thing.
Which is significant because those two schools do not agree on much.
No, they don't. Advaita and Dvaita disagree fundamentally on the nature of reality. One says all is one, the other says the soul and God are eternally distinct.
But they both agree on Kapila.
Right. Both of these massive intellectual heavyweights bow to the authority of Kapila.
That universal reverence actually ties perfectly into a brilliant piece of linguistic analysis from the sources.
Oh, the etymology breakdown.
Yeah. Madhva's commentator, a scholar named Jayatirtha, breaks down the etymology of the name Kapila itself.
It's fascinating.
It really reveals exactly why he is viewed as such a universally necessary figure. Break it down for us.
Sure. Jayatirtha's breakdown is a masterful example of ancient semantic unpacking. He takes the Sanskrit name Kapila and splits it into its syllabic roots. He associates the kam, or the ka sound, with the concept of pleasure, delight, or supreme happiness. The Sanskrit term is sukha.
So the first half of his name literally contains the concept of joy.
Correct. Then he takes the pila, or the p sound, and connects it to the concept of protection and sustenance.
Protection, okay.
When you fuse them together, Jayatirtha argues that Kapila is the seer who sustains and protects the world through the power of knowledge, thereby bringing infinite happiness.
So his name isn't just a label, it's a job description.
Exactly. From the internal perspective of this tradition, Kapila isn't merely a philosopher offering a theory.
He's an active force.
Yes, he is a protective mechanism built into the universe. His knowledge is a shield against ignorance and suffering.
Okay, so Mahavishnu downloads this universal code, and the avatar Kapila brings it into the mortal realm.
Right.
But Kapila, despite being an avatar, operates in a mortal framework. He doesn't stay on Earth forever.
No, he departs.
So how does a single avatar's knowledge survive 3,000 years of war, famine, changing languages, and shifting empires without getting corrupted?
This brings us to the human lineage. The transition from divine revelation to human preservation.
Passing the torch.
Exactly. The text that provides the clearest map of this specific transmission is the Sāṃkhya Karika.
Which, just to clarify, was written much later by Ishwara Krishna, but it looks backward to record the chain of custody.
Yes, that's correct. The Sāṃkhya Karika outlines that Kapila took this supreme purification doctrine and imparted it to his direct disciple, an ancient sage named Asuri Maharishi.
So Asuri is the first purely human node in our blockchain.
He is the initial human recipient. Kapila teaches Asuri. Then Asuri digests this profound cosmology and imparts it to his own student, Panchashika Maharishi.
And the texts make a very deliberate point about Panchashika's role.
They do. They note that by him, the philosophy was extensively propagated.
So Kapila is the source, Asuri is the receiver, and Panchashika is the scaler.
The sailor, yes.
He takes it from a private tutorial and broadcasts it. But here is where I really struggle with the timeline.
Where's the disconnect?
We have Mahavishnu, Kapila, Asuri, and Panchashika. But after Panchashika, the text uses a highly ambiguous phrase. It says the knowledge was handed down through a, quote, long tradition of pupils.
Yes, generations of unnamed practitioners.
This feels like a massive vulnerability in this system.
How so?
We're talking about centuries passing. If this was entirely an oral tradition for hundreds of years, how does it not succumb to the ultimate game of historical telephone?
Right, the message getting distorted.
Exactly. Going back to my blockchain analogy, how do you prevent the data from being corrupted if you don't have a computer verifying the hash at every single step?
That is the brilliance of the ancient Indian oral tradition, and it's where your blockchain analogy actually holds up beautifully if we understand their technology.
Wait, they had technology.
Not silicon chips, but they had meter, rhythm, and incredibly rigorous mnemonic chanting techniques.
Okay, but how does a chant protect complex philosophy?
Because the transmission wasn't just conversational. It wasn't just two guys talking. It was mathematically structured.
Oh, I see.
When the lineage eventually reaches Ishwara Krishna, who is considered the last rung in this traditional Rishi Parampara.
The human lineage.
Yes. When it reaches him, he doesn't just write a prose essay. He codifies the philosophy into the Sāṃkhya Karika using a very specific poetic meter called the Arya meter.
So the meter itself acts as the cryptographic hash.
Precisely. The Arya meter dictates an exact rhythm, an exact number of syllables, and a precise internal structure.
Wow.
If a student tries to memorize the text and accidentally drops a concept or changes a word or adds their own idea, the meter breaks.
The rhythm falls apart.
The rhythm falls apart, and the community immediately knows the data has been corrupted.
That is fascinating. So the poetry isn't just for aesthetics. It is a highly engineered security system for intellectual property.
It is pure data preservation. And Ishwar Krishna's codification is a massive turning point.
Why is it such a big deal?
He takes centuries of rigorous oral tradition and locks it into the oldest available classical Sāṃkhya treatise. He standardizes the 25 principles. He formalizes the epistemology.
He builds the definitive manual.
Exactly. After him, the era of the rishis, the seers who receive and preserve the pure doctrine, ends. The tradition transitions to the acharyas, the scholars and commentators whose job is to interpret and debate the locked text.
And once Ishwara Krishna locked it in, it didn't just sit on a shelf.
Oh, far from it.
The sources strongly suggest that this codification unleashed Sāṃkhya upon the entire Indian subcontinent, turning it into the foundational operating system for almost all subsequent thought.
The breadth of its influence is really staggering. We have some incredible quotes in the source material from Swami Vivekananda.
One of the most prominent modern exponents of Indian philosophy.
Right. And he does not mince words regarding Sāṃkhya's supremacy.
No, he is incredibly definitive. He calls Sāṃkhya, quote, the first rational system that the world ever saw.
Which is a huge claim.
Yeah. He says that any metaphysician anywhere in the world must pay homage to Kapila, calling him the great father of philosophy.
And Vivekananda makes a bold historical claim to back that up.
What's that?
He argues that after the ancient Upanishads, many different philosophical schools emerged. But even the pinnacle of later Indian thought, the great philosophy of Vyasa, which is Vedanta, is fundamentally a development out of the older Sāṃkhya framework.
When I look at the historical diagrams provided in our sources, mapping out how Sāṃkhya fed into other disciplines, I realize my earlier analogy actually needs an upgrade.
Blockchain isn't enough anymore.
No. Sāṃkhya isn't just a blockchain. It's the base HTML of ancient Indian intellectual life.
HTML, expand on how you see that functioning across different fields.
Well, think about building a website. You might be building an e-commerce platform or a social media site or a blog, right?
Sure.
They all look completely different and serve entirely different functions. But if you look under the hood, if you view the page source, they're all built using the same fundamental HTML tags.
Ah, I see.
Sāṃkhya provided those tags. The 24, 25, or 26 principles, this granular breakdown of reality into Purusha and Prakriti, that was the underlying code that everyone used.
Let's unpack those tags, because understanding what they exported is key to understanding why it was so universally adopted.
Okay, let's get into the mechanics.
At its core, Sāṃkhya posits a dualistic universe. You have Purusha, which is pure, unadulterated consciousness.
Pure consciousness.
Yes. It doesn't act. It only observes.
Okay.
Then you have Prakriti, which is the primordial, unmanifest material nature.
So consciousness on one side and the raw material of the universe on the other.
Yes. And Prakriti isn't just physical matter as we think of it. It contains three fundamental qualities or dispositions called the gunas.
Right. The sources mention sattva, rajas, and tamas.
Exactly. Sattva is illumination, balance, and purity.
Okay.
Rajas is dynamic action, passion, and turbulence.
Okay.
And tamas is inertia, darkness, and heaviness. Sāṃkhya maps out exactly how Purusha interacting with Prakriti causes these three gunas to lose their balance.
And that imbalance creates the world.
Yes. It cascades down into the manifestation of the intellect, the ego, the mind, the senses, and finally the gross physical elements.
An entire pipeline of reality.
It really is.
And if we look at how other disciplines use this pipeline, the HTML analogy really shines. Let's look at yoga, which the texts often call the twin of Sāṃkhya.
The Mahabharata explicitly pairs them, actually.
Really?
Yeah. It states, quote, "There is no knowledge like that of Sāṃkhya, no power like that of yoga. They are entirely symbiotic."
How so?
Well, Sāṃkhya provides the theoretical map, this deep ontology of Purusha and Prakriti, but it is highly intellectual. It's a theory.
Right.
Yoga takes that exact same map and develops the practical, physical, and meditative methodology to actually navigate it.
So yoga is the software running on sāṃkhya's hardware.
You could say that. You cannot practice the system of yoga without adopting the cosmology of sāṃkhya.
So yoga uses the code for spiritual liberation. But what really blew my mind, honestly, was seeing how the medical field used the exact same code.
You are referring to Ayurveda.
Yes, the traditional Indian system of medicine.
It's a direct application.
The sources point to the Charaka Samhita, one of the most foundational texts of Ayurveda. The text explicitly uses Sāṃkhya's principles.
Yes, it does.
But how does a doctor map a cosmic principle, like a tattva, to a physical ailment, like a fever or indigestion? It seems like a leap.
It does seem like a leap until you understand their premise. It works by understanding that the microcosm of the human body operates on the exact same logic as the macrocosm of the universe.
As above, so below.
Exactly. In Ayurveda, a physician doesn't just look at physical symptoms. They look at the gunas, the sattva, rajas, and tamas.
The same ones from the cosmological map?
The very same. They look at how those universal qualities are manifesting as physical doshas or psychological dispositions in the patient.
Oh, I see. So if a patient is incredibly lethargic and depressed, an Ayurvedic doctor diagnoses an excess of tamas.
Which is the universal principle of inertia, yes.
And then they treat them by trying to elevate rajas or sattva to bring back balance.
Exactly. The diagnostic grammar of the mind, ego, and intellect that a physician uses to heal a physical body is lifted directly from Kapila's philosophical breakdown of the universe.
That is just incredible.
And as Vivekananda points out on the text, these ancient thinkers didn't have microscopes or telescopes.
Right. They were working purely through observation and logic.
Yet, their analytical breakdown of reality was so logically sound, so inherently functional, that a doctor could use the exact same framework as a meditating monk.
And it wasn't just doctors and yogis either. The massive theological schools had to grapple with this framework too, didn't they?
They absolutely did. Think about the dominant Vedanta schools. You have Advaita, which argues for absolute non-dualism.
Everything is one.
Right. And you have Vishishtadvaita, which argues for qualified non-dualism. They're fierce theological rivals.
They debate constantly.
But when it comes to explaining how the physical world actually manifests, they adopt Sāṃkhya's 24 or 25 principles.
So they might argue about who the ultimate God is or the nature of the soul, but they agree on the physics of how the universe was built.
Precisely. They might retrofit the theology, arguing that Prakriti isn't an independent entity, but rather an illusion projected by Brahman, but they are still using Sāṃkhya's structural vocabulary.
It's unavoidable.
It is. The same goes for the massive tantric and agamic traditions, the Shaiva, Vaishnava, and Shakta schools.
Did they use it too?
Yes. They take the Sāṃkhya framework, and sometimes they expand it, pushing it to 36 principles to map higher spiritual strata, but the foundation remains undeniably Sāṃkhya.
It is universally pervasive. But a system like this doesn't just spring into existence fully formed, even with an avatar like Kapila.
No, it takes time.
The sources emphasize that it evolved over millennia. To truly grasp the scale of this, we need to look at the historical timeline provided by the scholar Gerald James Larson.
Right. Larson breaks this massive history down into 4 distinct historiographical phases.
Let's map those out, because Larson's framework is essential for understanding how the primordial intuitions of ancient ascetics eventually crystallized into dense medieval textbooks.
Let's begin at the very start of the timeline. Phase 1 is defined as ancient speculations.
And the dating here is vast. The sources say it spans from roughly 1500 BCE all the way down to the 8th or 9th century BCE.
We are looking at the foundational era of Indian intellectual inquiry here.
What kind of texts are we talking about?
This phase encompasses the oldest speculative Vedic hymns. Texts like the Nasadya Sukta, which questions the very origins of existence, asking what existed before existence itself.
Deep philosophical poetry.
Yes. It also includes the oldest prose Upanishads, and the text notes it extends through the rise of early Buddhism and Jainism, referencing the Shramana and Yadi ascetic groups.
But you wouldn't call this period Sāṃkhya yet, would you?
No, I wouldn't. I would characterize it as the primordial soup of the philosophy.
Primordial soup?
Yeah. The discrete terms and numbered lists don't really exist yet. Instead, you have profound, raw intuitions. The early ascetics are starting to differentiate between the eternal observer within and the fleeting, turbulent nature of the physical world.
So the ingredients are swirling together, but the soup hasn't been brought to a boil.
That's a good way to put it. The transition from that primordial soup to a more recognizable form happens in phase 2.
which Larson terms proto-sāṃkhya speculations.
This phase kicks off roughly around the 8th century BCE.
And the literature here just explodes in variety. The sources say this era includes the Middle Upanishads, the medical treatises like the Karaka-samhita we just discussed, epic poetry like the Buddha Karita, the Bhagavad Gita, the Moksha-dharma section of the Mahabharata, and the oldest Puranas.
Notice the shift in the type of literature.
What do you mean?
Phase 1 was almost exclusively mystical, ascetic poetry. Phase 2 is where the philosophy begins to permeate the practical and narrative life of the civilization.
Right, this is the application phase.
Exactly.
It's not just ascetics meditating in a forest anymore. It is doctors applying the gunas to health in Ayurveda.
Yes.
It is epic poets like Vyasa using the concepts of Purusha and Prakriti to explain cosmic duty and moral action to warriors on a battlefield in the Mahabharata.
It is becoming the operating system for society.
Right. But it's still, like, evolving, right?
It is gaining a robust vocabulary, but it is still highly fluid. It adapts to whatever discipline is using it. It hasn't built its own impenetrable fortress yet.
Oh. When does that happen?
That definitive systematization occurs in phase 3.
Okay. Phase 3 is titled Classical Sāṃkhya Speculation. The timeline given here starts around the 1st century CE, peaks dramatically between 350 and 400 CE, and extends all the way to the 11th century CE.
This is the Satukha Kala, the golden classical era.
The golden era.
Yes. This is when the fluid, adaptable concepts harden into rigorous, standalone philosophical treatises.
Enter Ishwara Krishna.
Exactly. It is the era dominated by Ishwara Krishna and his Sāṃkhya Karika, which we discussed earlier, along with Patanjali's Yoga Sutras and the vast array of commentaries written to explain them.
So if phase 2 was the application of the philosophy, phase 3 is the defense of it.
That's a perfect summary. The dualistic parameters are permanently locked in. The 25-principle pipeline is standardized.
The code is compiled.
Yes. But more importantly, their epistemology, their theory of knowledge, detailing exactly how they use perception, logical inference, and reliable scriptural testimony to prove their points, is sharpened into a precise weapon for intellectual debate.
They are gearing up for intellectual warfare.
They have to. They aren't just sharing ideas anymore. They're defending their system against brilliant rivals from Buddhist and early Vedantic schools.
The fortress is built and fortified.
Yes.
Which leads us to the final historical period in the sources, phase 4. Later Sāṃkhya speculation.
This phase runs from roughly 1100 CE to the 1300s or 1400 CE.
And the key texts here sound incredibly dense. The sources list the Sāṃkhya Sutra, the Tattvasama Sutra, and point to major scholars like Anuruddha, Mahadeva, and Vijnana Bhiksu.
Very dense, highly technical commentaries.
What is happening to the philosophy in this late stage?
Well, by phase 4, the revolutionary foundational work is complete. The fortress has stood for over a millennium.
So what's left to do?
What you see now is an era of intense scholasticism. It is characterized by deep cross-fertilization and intense polemics.
Like academic infighting.
Sort of. Vedanta has become the dominant intellectual force in India by this point. And these later Sāṃkhya scholars are writing incredibly complex, granular commentaries on the classic texts.
Trying to keep up.
Right. They are trying to reconcile Sāṃkhyan dualism with Vedantic non-dualism, or fiercely refuting the new critiques leveled against them.
It is the era of the academics dissecting the work of the pioneers. But, when you step back and look at that timeline, from the ancient Vedic speculations of 1500 BCE all the way to the scholastic commentaries of 1400 CE, it is almost impossible to comprehend.
It's a breathtaking scope of time.
We are talking about nearly 3,000 years of continuous, unbroken intellectual development. Can you think of any modern equivalent to this? Is there a single line of thought today that has sustained itself, adapted, and survived through millennia of shifting empires and massive religious upheavals?
Honestly, it is a profound rarity in human history. You might point to the broad survival of Aristotelian logic in the West.
Sure, Aristotle is huge.
But that is a generalized method of reasoning. What we have here is a specific, highly enumerated system of ontology.
Right.
A very particular map detailing exactly how consciousness interacts with the material world. And that exact map managed to remain the foundational grammar for an entire civilization's medicine, theology, and psychology for 30 centuries.
It is an unparalleled intellectual achievement.
It truly is.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We started by looking at the incredible paradox of a hyper-rational system anchoring itself in divine mythology.
The downloading of the cosmic code.
Yes. We explored the avatarana of jñāna, the descent of knowledge from Mahavishnu down to the miraculous pre-programmed avatar, Sage Kapila.
Then we traced the rigorous preservation of that knowledge through a human lineage, from Asuri to Panchashika.
Ultimately seeing it secured and codified in the rhythmic Arya meter by Ishwara Krishna, preventing that game of historical telephone.
Right.
We marveled at how that locked code became the mother of all philosophies, providing the structural HTML for everything from the spiritual heights of yoga to the physical diagnostics of Ayurveda.
And finally, we mapped out the 4 massive historical phases that carry this tradition from ancient chants to dense medieval textbooks. You know, when you look at the entirety of what we've discussed, it forces a very challenging reflection on how we approach knowledge today.
How so? What do you mean?
Well, the sources paint a picture of Sāṃkhya as a completely unified, holistic map of reality. Right. It was a framework that seamlessly integrated the deepest spiritual inquiries, the most rigorous logical debates, cosmological physics, and practical physical medicine. Everything spoke the same fundamental language of the gunas and the tattvas.
Right. Whether you were a monk seeking enlightenment or a doctor treating a fever, you were looking at the exact same map.
Exactly. Now, consider our modern world. Our disciplines are aggressively fragmented.
They really are.
Science, religion, psychology, and medicine exist in these rigidly defended silos. A physicist, a theologian, and a psychiatrist barely share a common vocabulary, let alone a unified grammar of reality.
They're speaking completely different languages.
Yes. So, if the ancient world was capable of building a single, cohesive framework that worked just as well for diagnosing an illness as it did for explaining the nature of the soul, what profound connections are we currently entirely blind to?
Wow.
What insights are we missing because we lack a modern equivalent of Kapila's unified vision?
That is a staggering thought to end on.
This is something to think about.
We began this deep dive talking about the modern expectation that rational thought must look like a clean, secular textbook, completely divorced from the epic, messy mythology of the divine.
The firewall.
Yes, the firewall. But looking at the 3,000-year legacy of Sāṃkhya, maybe that strict separation is our own modern limitation.
Perhaps.
Maybe the truest logic, the ultimate structural map of reality, is so profoundly complex and perfectly balanced that the only way humanity could ever fully comprehend and revere it was to recognize it as a gift handed down from the divine. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through the source code of ancient India. We will see you next time.